We all know the right combination of chords in a chord progression can hit you in the feels. But coming up with chords that fit can sometimes feel like playing a game of Minesweeper. If you don't know what you're doing, at some point you're just guessing and hoping your next move doesn't end in disaster. But get this, once you know how chord progressions work and why, just like a tried and true recipe, you'll know how to build a song with a solid foundation and then be able to repeat that process over and over again. So starting with the basics, what is a chord progression? Well, it's just a series of chords played one after another in a pattern, and that's it. Think of it like a color scheme that a painter or an artist would use for a painting. So how can we begin on any chord on the guitar and know where to go and it always sounds good? Enter the circle of fifths. Now I've heard music theory wizards say that the circle of fifths has nothing to do with chord progressions. And they're right. But saying that the circle of fifths cannot be used for chord progressions is like saying that you can't use a hammer to smash a tomato. I mean, yeah, it wasn't made for that, but it'll get the job done. So again, here's a circle of fifths. And if you've ever seen this and scratched your head before, don't worry. By the end of this video, not only will you make sense of it, but you'll be able to use it in your compositions the next time you pick up your axe. By using the circle of fifths, you can create chord progressions that feel natural and work well together. Now, in case you didn't know, there are 12 keys in music that you can choose from when you're composing music. And really, any of these notes can be the starting point or the root note of your song. Really, it just depends on where you want that starting point to be. Now, just as a side note, you typically don't blend two keys one on top of the other at the same time in the same song. And that's just because two different keys are going to have two different sets of notes, and they're probably going to clash and sound jarring, and probably not in a good way. Unless that's what you're going for. So let's think of the circle of fifths as a pie. Now this pie has been divided into 12 slices. So we're gonna take a look at the first piece of pie at the top, the C major. So because we're in the key of C right now, the C note becomes our home base or our root note. And what we do to find the next piece of pie in this diagram, we need to count 5 steps up from 1 using the major scale formula that we talked about in previous videos, which goes starting from 1, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. Okay, so we're going to use that formula to find our fifth. So starting on C as our 1, we're going to go a whole step up, which is D, whole step up, which is E, half step, which is F natural, and then a whole step up, which is G. So G is the fifth of C. Alright, so if our theory is correct, the next piece of pie is supposed to be G. So let's see if that's right. There you go. Now this piece of pie refers to not the G chord, but the key of G. So the way this diagram is designed, as we move to the next piece of pie, we now need to step out of the key that we were in this case C major, and learn the key of G major. And what this is going to do is going to show us how the key of C and the key of G are related and how they're different. So let's find out the differences between C and G by using our major scale formula, but now using G as our starting point. Alright, starting on G as our 1, we have 2, which is A, 3, which is B, 4, which is C, 5 is D, 6 is E. Now using our formula, we have to go a whole step from E. That's not F, that's F sharp. And then back to our root note, G. Alright, now let's compare the key of C major and the key of G major. Let's line them up and see where the change happens. For the most part, they look the same, right? But what's the difference between the C major and the G major? That's right, it's the F sharp note. Alright, so what's the next piece of pie? Well, what is the fifth step or the fifth interval in the G major scale starting from G as the 1? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We land on D as the fifth. Alright, so according to the major scale formula, D should be the fifth of G. So let's see if D is the next piece of pie. Alright, so there you go. There's the next note in the piece of pie. But what's the difference between the G major and the D major key? Alright, let's find out. Starting on D as the 1, we have 2 E, 3 F sharp, 4 is G, 5 is A, okay, 6 is going to be B, 7 is going to be C sharp, and we have the octave D. Alright, so we discovered 2 things here. The key of D has 2 sharps, and the fifth is A. So the next piece of pie in the circle of fifths is... there you go. Now, are you noticing a pattern yet? As you move clockwise around the circle, each new key adds 1 more sharp. The keys with more sharps appear more and more down the circle. But wait, what if you move counterclockwise in the diagram? If you move in the opposite direction, the keys actually go down by a fifth. So what comes before C in the diagram? Well, for that, we need to go backwards. We actually need to assume that C is the fifth of a certain particular key. So assuming that C is the 5th, we're going to go backwards up the scale. That's 5. We have to go a whole step according to the scale backwards. So that would be actually B flat. So we got C, B flat, and a half step from there is actually A. A whole step from there down would be G. And then here's our 1, which is going to be F. So going backwards, whole step, half step, whole step, we land on F. More specifically, according to this diagram, the F major key. Cool, so what's the difference between the F major and the C major? Just like we compared the G and the C, let's compare the F and the C. So the way the diagram was made, they considered the keys going clockwise to have sharps, okay? But when they go counterclockwise, they actually consider them to have flats. So the difference between C major and F major is 1 flat, and that is the B flat in its scale. So the next slice of pie, counterclockwise of F, is going to be B flat. And that's going to be more specifically the B flat major key, having 2 flats. The next one over, E flat, having 3 flats, and so on. Okay, wow, that was deep. And I know what you're thinking, should my brain be hurting this much? I sympathize. But here's where we can apply this diagram. The circle of fifths is great to use when coming up with chord progressions on guitar because the adjacent keys can theoretically and potentially become chords in our song. All we have to do is choose a starting point. So let's say you want to be in the key of C major. Well, that means that C is your root note. Using the circle of fifths, you can see that the chords right next to the C major are G and F. Now these 3 chords sound good together because they're right next to each other in the circle. And really it's up to you which ones you want to use and in what order. Now musicians typically use Roman numerals to represent the chords that are being used. So in the key of C major, the C chord is I for 1. The G chord becomes V for 5 because it's the 5th up from C. In the key of C major, the F becomes IV because it's the 4th. Now it can seem like you can't really come up with much with these 3 chords, but really this is where you start to implement different rhythms, different tempos, and different time signatures to make these chords sound different and have a different feeling. With these chords you can convey an array of emotions like sitting next to a campfire at night just relaxing and chilling, or you're getting ready for a bull run and you like it. But if your starting point changes, like to say F, well a lot of things change. If F is the root or the 1, then C becomes the V or the 5, and B flat becomes the 4 or the IV. In the key of F major, now the G major chord is actually not an option unless you want to sound like you're changing keys because the notes are different in the G major and the F major key. So all in all, the circle of fifths helps you see which chords work well together and shows you what chords you can use in that key. Now let's add some variety to our major chords. That's where the inner circle of the circle of fifths comes in. Imagine someone came along and cut an inner circle to our 12 pieces of pie. Now we have a bottom piece to each slice. So in the circle of fifths diagram, the inner circle refers to the relative minor keys of the top key. So as we remember, the minor is a more of a sad or moody or serious kind of sound. So why are they called relative minor? Well, because they actually are the same piece as the above piece. Think of the bottom piece as its moody twin brother going through a punk phase. Now to understand relative minors and how they relate to the top key, imagine we took a major scale, chopped off the first 2 notes, and stitched them over to the end. Same notes, but now we have a different starting point. This changes the key from a major, cheery, happy-go-lucky feel to a minor, serious, moody feel, even though we have the same notes. So how do we find the relative minor of any given major key? Well, just as we found the 5th of C, which is G, using the major formula and counted 5 steps up from the 1, and remember how we could count backwards to find the F, counterclockwise from C, down 5 steps? So to find the relative minor or the inner piece of pie, we need to count down a minor third starting from our 1, and that will give us our relative minor. So to find the relative minor of C, for example, we need to count down a minor third starting from C. Does your head hurt yet? So now we need to pull up the minor formula to find out what that bottom piece is. Now here's the formula for the minor scale again, which we're going to use to find it. So assuming that C is the minor third of a key, let's count backwards. Starting with a third, C, count half step down, that's B, and now A. So if our theory is correct, that bottom piece should be A, more specifically A minor or AM. Alright, there you go. So the relative minor of C is A minor. But essentially, what does that mean? Well, remember how we called them twins? We can think of them as twins because just like actual twins, they share the same DNA, but have different personalities. One is cheerful and outgoing, listens to Ed Sheeran and the Beach Boys. The other one is doom and gloom and listens to Billie Eilish and Radiohead. But again, same notes, different starting point, different moods. So now that we know how to find the relative minor, let's go down the circle and find the relative minor of G using the same formula. Starting at G, being our minor third, we're going to go a half step down, F sharp, and then the next note is going to be our relative minor, E. All right, so the next piece, E minor. There it is. Again, they have the same notes, but different personalities. All right, so I know what you're thinking right now. I hope there was a point to my brain oozing out of my ear holes, and yes, there is. This information is useful because it helps you find both major and the minor chords that fit well together. The boxes that are touching your root note are the chords that you can use while staying in key. And now, like a painter, like an artist, you can choose your colors to work with. But what if you did something weird like pick a key and then use the chords around it and dance around the root chord and avoid that root chord in your progression? Well, you might create unresolved and tension in the listener. They might hear this progression and then their ear wants to go in a direction, but you're not letting it go in that direction. And that might not be a bad thing depending on what the context of the music is. Maybe you want to build tension there before releasing it and resolving it later on. Knowing how chords work and how they relate to each other will help you compose music and convey the message that you want. So some people have asked, what's the wrong way to use a circle of fifths when coming up with chord progressions? One person asked, how many steps can I jump in the circle? Must we always use the same chord next to it? And the answer is, you can jump as many as you like. You're the composer. You make the rules. Does it sound good? If it does, do it. Another question was, can we navigate from the outer circle to the inner circle, switching from major to minor? C major seems to overlap D minor, E minor, and A minor. And really, it's just the same answer as before. You're the boss, you're the composer, you make the rules, you make the music. Another question was, there seems to be a third inner layer circle. And yes, that's right, there is a third ring. Top one is majors, the second one over is minors, and the third ring below the minor is diminished chords in this diagram. The diminished chords are chords that are related to ring 1, but have a much different feel. You find it by counting 7 steps up from the 1 in the major scale. So using the key of C, with C as our 1, we're gonna count 7 steps up to find our diminished. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There it is. So if we play a B diminished chord along with the other chords, it should in theory sound good. Man, I tell you, that threw some interesting colors into that, but it sounded good and it fit right, even though that chord alone, I mean, it sounds halfway dissonant, but in that key, it just works. It adds so much tension, and when you hit that C chord again, it just, all it is to say is just put the chords together that you want to put and go make an art.